Thank you. Well, good morning. Can everyone in the back hear me? Give me a thumbs up. We're good? Thank you very, very much. To the distinguished individuals here, as the Colonel has recognized, I add my thanks for your presence today. To our Estonian hosts, I thank you for this year's version of CyCon, and I thank you for a beautiful day and a beautiful place. We're all really lucky to be here to spend some time talking about an important subject, I think, for all of us. What I was specifically asked to talk about was the importance of partnerships. And I think you see that reflected in the audience that is with us today and in the schedule that the Colonel has laid out. For the next 3 days, we'll see a compendium of policymakers in government, in NATO's alliance structure, the U.S. military, academia, industry, other private business. I think the essence of cyber in the future is how do we create a series of partnerships that enable us to access the best of what the government brings to this problem set, as well as what the private sector and the power of the intellectual thought that academia will bring to this. There is no one single group. There is no one single nation. There is no one single entity that has all the answers here. This is a complicated mission area. It's a complicated operational and technical environment. And together, we have to figure out how are we going to create something that is both reliable, safe, open, resilient, and enables a host of functions. That is not an easy challenge, but that is at its heart, I think, what we need to create for the future. And we need to do it in a way that enables a whole lot of different actors to use this cyber arena to execute a host of functions. Think about the changes we've seen in the last 45 years. What we take for granted today started approximately 45 years ago, this thing we call the internet, and it was designed to answer a fundamental problem. How do you rapidly move information between individuals who are widely geographically dispersed? How do you do it at speed, and how do you do it at volume? That was the fundamental idea in the late 1960s when the Department of Defense in the United States, what we used to call ARPA, our kind of research and development organization, when in the late 1960s they were given that challenge. How do you create a framework that enables us to rapidly move information at great distances between geographically dispersed users? And over time, thus was born the internet, and as it is morphed now into the World Wide Web. Think about what we didn't think about 45 years ago when we started this journey. We assumed we knew who all the users were, that they would be well-defined, and at the time, a relatively small number. We assumed that we could do this in a very open, unclassified architecture, and that the requirement to defend that architecture wasn't really a primary design consideration. It was very secondary at the time, not really a primary driver in how it was designed. Fast forward now 45 years later, and we have a World Wide Web structure that has exploded in terms of numbers of users. So we have challenges about identity. We have challenges about how do you create a structure that has the kind of capacity that enables us to take insight and share information on a global basis between not only individuals, but a whole other lot of identities, whether they be machines, individuals, other actors. And to do it in an environment in which increasingly, whether they be criminal actors, nation states, groups, are interested in attempting to either enter that system and manipulate data for a specific outcome that is different from what the user intended, We never really contemplated that 45 years ago when we started this journey. And so we find ourselves in a place that I don't think we ever really thought about when we began this 45 years ago. And the challenge for all of us, I think, in the future, really the focus of the conference, so how do we create something that enables us to build on this foundation, but enables us to do it in a way that we create a structure that is both open, reliable, safe, and resilient? Now, as a naval officer, we are all victims of whatever our particular experience is in life. So as a naval officer, my experience, my frame of reference tends to be the seas around the world, which, much like the cyber domain, not governed by a single nation state, span the globe, are focused on the concepts of commercial activity, trade, and tourism, the ability to move goods, services, people, ideas around the globe on ships, to do it in a framework that exists outside the control of individual states, so to speak, and to do it in a way that over time in the seas of the world we had developed a series of norms of acceptable behaviors. I'm very used to that idea as a naval officer. It's shaped life at sea that we all know for the world for a long time. So I'm very comfortable personally with the idea of, can't we create the same kind of structure in the internet? Can't we create a global commons, so to speak, that enables open, reliable, safe, secure, and resilient communications, the flow of information and ideas that enables us to do it in a framework that maximizes its use for all of us? Because this has become so foundational to the future, the idea that a state, a nation, a single entity is going to control it, I'm not sure is particularly workable. And again, my frame of reference is we've tried to consciously avoid that approach in the maritime world. I'd like to see if we can try to create something equivalent to the maritime world in the cyber world. It enables us to keep moving information, keep moving commerce, keep moving ideas on a global basis. So we're presented with a pretty significant challenge. This is not something that we're going to solve in a course of a couple of years, and it will take a large global consensus as to how we're going to move our way forward. And every one of us right now, whether you're a nation state, a company, an individual, we are all trying to figure our way forward to this. So whether you're the NATO alliance, whether the United States, all of us are working towards. So within this framework, how do we achieve the outcomes we feel we need, but we do it in a way that engenders cooperation? How do we do it in a way that engenders dialogue? When I look to the future, which again is the thrust of much of the conference over the next 3 days, what I hope we don't find is a world in which the internet becomes something fractured, something balkanized, something broken down into components, where the ability to move information freely, seamlessly, and nearly instantaneously is somehow degraded or controlled. I don't think that's in any of our best long-term interests. And so we've got to figure out, how are we going to do that? And I think at its heart, the way we're going to do that is our ability to create partnerships. The ability to bring multiple nation states, multiple actors, multiple individuals, multiple groups together to work our way through this problem set. We're trying to do that in the United States. Some of you may be aware within the Department of Defense, which I am a part of as a serving military officer in the United States, within the last month, we've unveiled our cyber strategy, how we look at the world, what we think we need to do in the cyber arena. And you will see that of the 5 strategic goals in that Department of Defense strategy for cyber in the United States, one of the 5 strategic goals explicitly talks about partnerships and how to get where we need to, we believe, within the Department of Defense, back in the United States, that this idea of partnerships is going to be foundational to the future. You see that in the relationships we are trying to create. It's one of the reasons, quite frankly, why I find myself in Estonia this morning. Because I look at the agenda, I look at what we're going to be talking about in the next few days, I look at the power of intellect and thought that all of you bring to this important set of issues, and I think there's something here to be learned. And I am interested in learning. I wish I could tell you that I had all the answers. I don't. I'm the first to acknowledge that. But I think collectively between us, the answers are out there. And we got to figure out how we're going to make this work. What I thought I would do otherwise was, in addition to just me talking, I had said I'm willing to take questions on any topic. So what I thought I'd do is, what questions do you have on your mind for me? Sir. And I'll repeat the question if I hear it so everyone else can hear it.
Before asking questions, would you state your name and affiliation, please?
Yes, my name is Richard Hill. I'm in camouflage here. I've been invited in as the provocateur, as you'll see. I'm a radical civil society activist opposed to mass surveillance and other things of that nature. Sir, I really liked your speech because indeed I think your analogy to the sea is excellent. And as I'm sure you know and other people know, there has been talk about doing something equivalent to the law of the sea for the internet. We're at very early stages. There have been some attempts to do it. And in fact, I've been deeply involved in that. I used to work with the ITU as a senior staff member. I was heavily involved in the conference in Dubai, which I'm sure you know about.
Right.
So I'll be very blunt, sir. Why is the US actually, in real terms, when we get down to real discussions, real proposals, acting exactly the contrary to the message you've given today? That is, why is the US not actually cooperating, except to the extent that the cooperation furthers the US, sorry to use the word, sir, imperialistic goals? Thank you, sir.
Well, I'm glad you're someone who speaks their mind. So, well, I don't think you're going to be surprised. I would disagree with your characterization that the U.S. is unwilling to work with others. So that, you know, I would reject the premise of the question. But I think it's fair to say, so how is the U.S., along with other nations, going to help us move forward with the kind of broad tenets we talked about? So Dubai and the other sessions that we have that have been ongoing for some period of time, I think are examples of each nation trying to lay out what's their vision. There are some out there who argue the internet should be an extension of the sovereign state, and therefore the same controls, the same mechanisms that the sovereign state has enjoyed literally for centuries now, in terms of the control of information, the control of access, the control of its own sovereignty, should be translated into a mechanism to control the internet, if you will, in simple terms. From a U.S. perspective, we have rejected that premise. Our argument has been that is not what has powered the growth that we have seen in the internet. That has not what has facilitated the greatest exchange. You could argue that the internet has brought the greatest exchange of information, insight, and ideas in the history of man in just 45 years. I think from a U.S. perspective, that's a powerful thing, and we want to retain that ability, and that we think by using the internet from a sovereign state perspective, it works against those very values. So from my perspective, the U.S. has been very consistent in arguing that's not the framework that we believe is in the best interest of the world, certainly in the best interest of our own nation. You know, the argument we have made is, hey, it's much more of a global commons piece. Now, clearly, the challenge of gaining consensus, and you live this, you know, all the time, in trying to gain consensus in international forums is not easy. And, you know, you mentioned surveillance, so clearly that's part of the atmosphere that's out there today. Again, I'm not stupid, and I don't pretend that I don't have a recognition of what's going on in the world around me. I think we're going to move beyond that. I certainly hope that we're going to be able to generate that consensus I think we all need, because if we don't, this engine that has powered so much growth, so much generation of knowledge, so much creation of wealth, quite frankly, if we're not careful, we'll lose the very attributes that have really made it what it is. And I don't think that's that any of us want that. What else for me?
Over there, question?
And I apologize, with the lights, I can't see you well.
My name's David Martediste from Reuters. My question is regarding the non-aggression pact on cyber issues signed between or agreed between Russia and China. Do you have an opinion about that, or is this a threat to balkanization from your point of view?
Well, I certainly hope not. To be honest, I have not sat down and read the fine details of the agreement. I'm certainly aware of its existence. Nation states routinely enter into agreements on a variety of subjects, so in and of itself, I'm not overly worried from that perspective. You know, again, as I answered the last question, the biggest thing I think from a U.S. perspective we would argue is, let's remember what created the internet, what generated its value, and what has made it the engine of global change that it has been. And we don't want to lose anything. We don't want to do anything that loses that. Sir?
Sir,
Oh, sorry.
Jarno Limnell, professor in Aalto University, Finland. You have earlier said a few times that one of the biggest challenges what the United States has is that how you are able to integrate cyber capabilities with your other capabilities. And I would appreciate if you could explain that logic a little bit larger way. Thank you.
So are you talking from a military perspective? Are you talking
From the military
more
perspective,
broadly?
yes.
So, from a U.S. perspective, and again, this is laid out in the strategy that we have just released within the last month, our view is that cyber is another operational domain, much as the seas are, much as the land environment is, much as space is. And that increasingly, it is an environment in which we will conduct a series of very traditional military evolutions, from the defense of things to the application of capability to generate specific kinds of effects. That we think that this will evolve, cyber will evolve over time, much as we've seen the other domains, if you will, that were in the more traditional arena. It's a construct personally I'm very comfortable with. It reflects my own experience, what I've observed in my own life in uniform. I've been a serving officer now for about 33 and a half years. It's pretty consistent with what I have observed over time. It reflects the investment we are making as a nation, you know, because our number one concern is we have to be able to defend our own networks. Increasingly, we're, like many, we're a global nation with a footprint that spans the globe, and we use cyber and our connectivity as a vehicle to connect widely dispersed units, capabilities, and resources. We need to be able to tie that all together. Should we lose that capability, it starts to have a significant impact on our ability to execute our mission. That's not a good thing. It also offers the possibility of advantage as well, and so we're interested in how we can best take advantage of that. Remember, reminding ourselves always that whatever we do, we operate in a legal framework and in a broader set of global norms that we hope develop over time. We always remember that. I don't ever forget that. Was there a question over there? I apologize, sir. I thought I saw a hand.
Sir, Bill Whitman from Air Force Research Lab Information Directorate. Where do you see the international partnership and cooperation going, not just with operational, but onto technology development, partnerships, academia, and on the basic research side?
So the things that interest me when I look at technology go from some areas you might not immediately think of. One thing I think that unites us all is we are all trying to create a workforce of human individuals who understand this environment and can operate well within it. So I'm always interested in how do I harness the power of technology to help me create a workforce that's optimized for today and tomorrow. I also find, and you're going to have a panel on it, as a matter of fact, in the next couple days. Cyber situational awareness is another area we're really interested in. You know, how do we harness the power of technology? As a military individual, I am used in my career, well before I got into cyber, but I'm used to the idea, for example, I could walk into a space in a command ship as a naval officer, and I would always see, we've developed over time a set of visual displays in which we use color, symbology, and geography to enable a commander to very quickly look at a geographic spatial display, get a sense for what's going on in the area, and start to enable faster decision making. We don't really have that yet in cyber, and we clearly need that. So I'm really interested in the situational awareness piece. I'm interested in fundamentally, how do we turn the tables from a defensive standpoint? Most defensive strategies today in cyber focus on a signature-based approach, which assumes you have knowledge of the activity that's coming at you, which works great until you get into the zero-day arena, and then you're not so successful sometimes. I'm interested in how can we, not that signature-based defensive strategies are going to go away, but I'm interested personally in how do you move from that into something that would not only let us retain a signature-based capability, but that could let us get into behavior and predictive modeling to get ahead of threats. Again, that to me is a really cutting-edge challenge for all of us. And you know, we all are interested in trying to defend our nets to ensure that our information is secure and that the means and the ability of us to share with each other, that's uncontested. You know, the defensive side is something here I think that unites all of us. How do we secure our information? How do we make sure our systems are safe? It's one of the three, in the Department of Defense in cyber, we have three primary missions. Priority number one for us is defend our systems, defend our networks, defend our information. That's priority number one. And so I'm very much interested in how can I harness the power of technology to take a fundamentally different perspective about how we're going to do that. And I think that's a real challenge for us.
Hello, Frédéric Douzet.
I hear a voice. Oh, thank you, ma'am. I apologize. With
I'm a
the lights,
professor
I have
at the
trouble seeing.
University of Paris 8. I had a question regarding encryption by the Google, Apple, Facebook, and other companies. Because after the revelations about mass surveillance and the forced collaboration of American internet companies, a lot of countries, especially in Europe, realized their extreme dependency over American platforms and were seriously bothered by the fact that the government could access these platforms. And we've heard a lot of calls for regaining digital sovereignty that raise concern about fracturation and about balkanization of the internet. So wouldn't the interest of the global good to let these companies develop encryption?
Well, you're not going to hear me say that encryption is a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. What you've heard us talk about, well, first, let me start slightly different. Every nation in the world tries to understand the world around it. Every nation in the world has, not every, but most nations, particularly most of you that are all here today, do that within a broad legal framework. That is exactly what we do in the United States. We operate within a broad legal framework that governs exactly what we can and we cannot do. Encryption is not bad. Encryption is a fundamental part of the future. I think it would be ridiculous to pretend otherwise. The challenge I think that we're trying to address is how do we address the means to ensure the security of our citizens while at the same time we never forget the other imperative that particularly shapes us, not just in the United States, but I would argue in any democracy in the world. How do we protect that imperative of our rights as citizens? Two important imperatives. How do we defend our citizens? How do we ensure their rights are adhered to? And it's not either or. Speaking for the United States, we got to do both. Two important imperatives, and we got to do both. The question of encryption becomes, to me, so within these two very important imperatives, each of which must coexist at the same time, how do we create a structure where there's a legal framework that enables us to meet both these imperatives? And my concern about encryption becomes, absent some sort of legal, and I would argue it should be a legal framework. It shouldn't be, you know, I would argue me in my role, for example, as the director of the National Security Agency. You don't want me to deciding this. You want a broader legal framework deciding this. But can't we create some mechanism where within this legal framework, there's a means to access information that directly relates to the security of our respective nations. Even at the same time as we're mindful, we have got to protect the rights of our individual citizens. And so we're trying to work our way through as a nation, it's not unique to the United States. We're all out there trying to address this same challenge. We have this framework within the phone system in the United States and other areas. Why can't we create a similar kind of framework within the internet and the digital age? And so we're going to work our way through. How are we going to do that? Mindful that we've got to meet both of these imperatives, that we can't sacrifice the one for the other. We got to meet both these imperatives. I certainly have great respect for those who would argue, hey, the most important thing is to ensure the privacy of our citizens. We shouldn't allow any means for the government to access information. I would argue that's not in a nation's best long-term interests, that we've got to create some structure that should enable us to do that. Mindful that it has to be done in a legal way, and mindful that it shouldn't be something arbitrary, that a government just decides, hey, today I want to do this. That's not what I think we want to do. And so America, as in most other nations of the world right now, we're trying to work our way through this and figure out how are we going to do it. What else for me? Ma'am. Oh, they have a microphone for you.
Thank you. I'm Lieutenant Commander Kang, Rank Navy officer. You said the importance of partnership, and the new U.S. cyber strategy emphasized the role of alliance. So what is the most important role of allies for preparing cyber war against malicious attack like North Korea?
So could you say the last part one more time? I want to make sure I understood the question.
What is the most important role of allies
The role
for
of
doing
allies.
cyber war against like
Exactly.
North Korea?
So, increasingly, we live in an interconnected world in which your strength as a nation, as a military organization, is tied to your weakest link, so to speak. And so, because, speaking for the United States, our alliances are so important to us, whether it's here in Europe, whether it's out in the Western Pacific, whether it's in the Middle East and other areas around the world, our alliance and relationships with other nations become critical for us. And so because of that, we're very interested as we move our way through in this journey in cyber, how are we going to do it in a way that enables us to work very closely with our allies? That the price of all this can't be we just decide now each of us is going to go do things by themselves. So for us, this becomes critically important. Previously in my career, I have served out in the Pacific, for example, so my heart is always out there a little bit. It's an area of the world that I really love. I've spent time in it. I still spend a lot of time out in the Western Pacific in my current job. I'm out there a couple times a year normally. So it's foundational to us for the future. It's not unique to cyber. If you look, for example, here in Europe, in NATO as an alliance, as we try to figure across, we're approaching 30 nations now in the NATO alliance. Who would have thought? Remember back to the size we used to be. Within that plethora of nations, wide range of capabilities. And we're trying to make sure that even as we have that wide range of capabilities, we're able to continue to move forward as a whole. Cyber will be one component of that. How do we move forward as a whole? It'll be true here in Europe. I think it'll be true out in the Western Pacific. The alliances, I would argue, make us stronger, though. They give us a whole lot more options, and they give us a much broader set of perspectives, and that's of great value, I would argue, to every member of an alliance. Ma'am. Oh, nope, she's way ahead of me. Never mind.
Good morning.
Morning.
I am Laura Halminen. I'm from the biggest daily, Helsingin Sanomat in Finland.
I'm sorry, the biggest daily in Finland.
Yes, I'm from Finland. I think we're quite a few here around.
Did you see the way she threw her shoulders back and said the biggest daily in Finland? Very proud.
Okay,
Very good.
let's get to the topic. And I am afraid of being a bit blunt myself too. Looking back to 2 years ago, Mr. Keith Alexander was here, just about 2 days before some rather unpleasant news started breaking about the NSA. And I'm talking about the Snowden leaks here. And I think in 2 years, quite a bit has changed in the public conversation concerning cyber and encryption and many other things. And then I've also partly studied the new DoD strategy you mentioned, and I find it rather open, even bold-ish. So looking back to the days when the NSA used to be called no such agency, and now you're here. Do you see a change in the openness on talking about surveillance? And is it good?
Well, there's certainly, again, we got to be honest with ourselves, there's certainly a much broader discussion. I'm not sure that discussion over much of the last 2 years has been particularly well-informed or fact-based, but there's certainly been much more of a discussion over the last couple of years. The same principles that governed us prior to that drive us today. We operate within a legal, lawful framework in the United States. We don't violate the law. We haven't, we won't. That commitment remains unchanged. It's what shapes the men and women that I'm fortunate enough to team with, as we work every day to try to defend our nation as well as our allies around the world. Certainly a wide variety of opinions out there as to what's the right way to do things. I certainly understand that. I don't think my being here today, for example, would have been any different. I would have done that anyway. I've always done that in the course of my career, well before this job. I apologize. I'm trying to think of a specific example that's moving in my mind, and I'm blanking out. So let me just say that, the dialogue was continuing before. It'll continue again in the future, because this is a complicated set of issues that as a world we're trying to deal with. And it's not unique to the United States. We've gotten much of the attention, but it sure isn't unique to us, let me tell you. Sir.
Good morning. It's back here.
Okay, there you go.
Good morning. Vladimir Radunovic from Diplo Foundation, the academic institution. Before posing a question, if I may, sir, just a brief suggestion when you mentioned the possible fragmentation of the internet, that we avoid the term Balkanization. Personally coming from Balkans, from Serbia,
Yeah.
But besides that, besides the Balkans deserve a second chance, there is a conceptual difference which I may elaborate, but I don't want to. So just a kind request that we stick to fragmentation. But a question, thank you for that.
No, it's okay.
But the question refers to when you mentioned the global commons as an idea, how do you see a possible future global deal towards disarmament, or at least the reduce of conflicts? Do you see it as a kind of a global treaty about cyberspace, or as a kind of treaty regarding the global goods, or rather based on the confidence building measures such as the OSCE and the others, or maybe even much softer kind of approach like the Internet Governance Forum of the United Nations? What is the model that you see as the US in future towards cyberspace? Thank you.
Well, my first comment would be, boy, if I could predict the future well, I wouldn't be wearing a uniform right now, and I'd be making a whole lot more money, I suspect. So I don't know. I'm never one who's been particularly good at trying to predict the future. If my experience in the maritime environment tells me anything, it's the idea that there's no one single legal framework, there's no one single treaty that's going to solve every challenge, address every issue, or lay out every vision of the way forward. That what we have done over time in the maritime environment is through a series of legal frameworks, agreements, the development of norms of behavior over time, broad international conventions for what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. We've been able to develop, a pattern of acceptable behavior that has played itself out pretty well day to day. I'd like to see if there's something similar that we could do within this cyber arena. So we'll see how it works. And with that, I have time for one more question, I think.
Sorry, I'll take the
Ma'am.
floor.
It's Kim Zetter with Wired magazine in San Francisco. You talked about finding that balance between surveillance and civil liberties, but it seems to me that there's another conflict that exists between defending networks and attacking networks. And so I'm wondering about that reconciliation, with not just with 0 days, when you uncover 0-day vulnerabilities and you withhold information in order to be able to attack those vulnerabilities, rather than disclosing the vulnerabilities to companies to protect them. But we had another issue that came up with Stuxnet in particular, and that was the use of digital certificates, stolen digital certificates that were taken from a legitimate company in order to impersonate software by those companies. The Flame spyware used a Microsoft digital certificate. And when you use digital certificates from companies, it's undermining the security of those companies and the trust that those companies have with their customers. So you talked about the US doing things within a legal framework, but often there's this chasm between what you can do legally and what you should do. So where is the line drawn in terms of protecting systems and defending them and securing them, and then attacking?
So for us as a nation, the President of the United States has been very public and very direct that the default mechanism to us is the default to the defensive side. So as we detect vulnerabilities, as we look at strategies about how we generate insights, the direction has been very specific to us. We have a process that we use where we assess vulnerabilities, the greater majority by orders of magnitude, which we share with the private sector. And we have a conscious process that we go through that's a policy-driven process. It's not just us at the National Security Agency, for example, that make this kind of decision. Because we are aware of that challenge, that kind of pressure that you talk about, those concerns. So we have created a framework over time that enables us more broadly to take a look at it and to try to address it. And I think, we've gotten the balance pretty right so far. We'll see how this plays out over time, but we do have a process that we go through to do it. With that, I thank you all very, very much for your time. I thank you very much for your willingness to come together on a very complicated set of issues. And Colonel, thank you very much for today.
Admiral, thank you.
The CyCon mug.
Admiral, thank you very much for your inspiring speech. Thank you very much for answering questions. Thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. Please accept this small token of appreciation designed right here in Estonia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.